Good evening, UK Crime Book Club. I've got Brian McGilloway here with me, who I've just been telling off for how good this book is. So, do you want to introduce yourself and show off the book cover, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, I don't even know if I have it, but
Shall I just hold mine up? There you go.
yeah, perfect.
I ordered mine from a large online retailer that not everybody's a fan of, but arrived last night. So.
Look, hi, I'm Brian McGilloway. I am the writer of 12 crime novels, The Empty Room being the most recent, which came out yesterday. And I'm really, really glad to be here and very grateful to Samantha for the invitation to chat about the book.
Firstly, you're going to have to stop calling me Samantha because I feel like I'm in trouble.
It's the teacher on my head.
Only my mum calls me Samantha. And yeah. Or my husband, oddly enough, when he introduces me to people, this is my wife, Samantha. No idea why, never calls me that the rest of the time. Bizarre. But so congratulations on publication day of The Empty Room. What did you do to celebrate yesterday? You've had quite a busy week, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been fairly busy. Wednesday night, I did an event in Belfast with John Connolly, which was good crack. And then kind of early hours of Thursday morning, headed across to London, and then did an event with Arminta Hall in London last night. And I'm just back home about an hour. I'm very, very glad to be doing an event this evening. And then I'm doing a signing in Derry tomorrow, and that's so like busy enough, 3 or 4 days, but there are worse things you can be doing than signing your books and talking about books, so I'll not complain.
It must be quite exciting for publication week to be able to be out in the world again for it. Or have you found it a bit daunting?
No, it has been because the past two books that have come out have been in lockdown. The Last Crossing came out in 2020, and literally came out the first week of the lockdown. And I had events organised, and they all obviously had to be cancelled. And then Blood Ties came out last year, and we were in lockdown again last year when it came out. So it's been really nice actually being able to do live. But then also I think one of the benefits of the way in which we all adapted to lockdown was events like this, where you're able to also do online interviews and kind of talk to people that it might not be convenient for them to come along to some of the live events. So and I suspect that this will keep going, that kind of hybrid of live and online, and I hope it does. Actually, it's great.
Yeah, and I think there's so many people. I mean, like myself, I work from home, don't go out very much. Quite happy about that. I used to be very sociable and outgoing, and I still am, but I can do that from home now, which is nice. So there's so many people who don't get to go out just all year round anyway. So I think it's nice to have a hybrid.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, and particularly, I mean, I think even from a writing point of view, I'm kind of relatively introverted, and certainly with the first lockdown, there was I mean, obviously it was tough in some ways, and it was a horrendous situation for people who lost family. But there was also something quite kind of, whether it was the novelty or whether it was just having your family close to you, and that kind of everyone there. The second lockdown was a very different experience, I think, and funnily enough, it was during that I wrote The Empty Room, because I think at that stage there was a sense of this is going to go on forever, and it was the middle of winter, and it was dark, and it was cold, and there wasn't there was just a kind of a sense of interminability about it that made it quite challenging, I think.
So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to tell everybody what you've just been telling me about how long it took you to write the book. But we've got some hellos first. So hi, Kaz and Patsy. Laura, hello. Hi there from Soft G. That's David Monaghan Jones, who I can never remember if it's Monaghan or Monaghan. So now he just calls himself Soft G. I can never remember which way around it is, which he forgives me for, but teases me mercilessly, which is fun. Oh, hi, Steve Munoz, and hi, Andrew, and Daniel, and Chris McDonald. Well, you've got quite an audience already, and we've only just got started.
Hello.
So
Joining us.
tell us all how long it took you to write The Empty Room and put me to shame for my 10 years working on nothing.
Yeah, it was. I should qualify this because it sounds bad.
No, it sounds incredible.
No, it doesn't. It sounds like maybe you should have spent longer at it. It took about 40 days, kind of from start to finish. I started it in kind of mid-February last year and finished it towards the end of March. And I think part of it was an idea that I'd had for quite a while. It's an idea I've had for 4 or 5 years, and couldn't quite work out how to tell it in a way that that wouldn't be utterly bleak. That trying to find hope and trying to find some opportunity for redemption. So it took a while to kind of work out how to do that. And then just I woke up one morning because we were teaching from home, obviously, during that lockdown.
That was fun, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was an experience because we had 4 kids as well, so we were kind of homeschooling and doing online. And then I woke one morning about 6:30, and just Dora's voice was kind of in my head and ready to talk. And the story was quite a challenging story to write. It was very easy in one way, but in terms of kind of the emotional weight of it, it was quite challenging. And I think I just wanted to get it out of my head. To be honest, I just kind of wanted to get it out on the page because I tend to obsess about plots. So whenever I'm writing, and in fairness, even with the other books, I tend to be fairly quick. Normally, kind of 3 months, kind of 2 to 3 months would be a kind of average enough. And it's because I obsess over the plot and obsess over character and how characters are feeling and why they react the way that they do. But with this story, because of the subject matter, it was just one that I wanted just to get out of my system and onto the page. Because once it's on the page, you kind of it frees up your headspace, and then you can come back and craft it. So when I say it was 40 days, it was the first draft of it was 40 days, and then obviously there was the kind of crafting process then. But I don't know if that's that unusual. I think some crime writers tend to write quite quickly. And I remember reading that all the James Bond books were all 6 weeks each. I think Ian Fleming did them in 6 weeks.
Wow.
So I think crime writers can be quite quick once you actually get the story started, and then you kind of get that sense of momentum.
I can imagine this being a difficult book as a dad of 4, as you said, quite a difficult book to live in while you're writing it. Is there any switching off from this kind of subject?
The way in which I write is that I kind of write for about an hour and a half or 2 hours in a day, and I tend to try to write about a chapter, so kind of 1,000 to 1,500 words. And to be honest, it's almost like a kind of a compulsion that once I've done that in the day, once I've kind of written the chapter for that day, it's like an itch that's been scratched. And I'm quite happy then to go on about my business and kind of and I'm able to park it for the rest of the day. And then I wake up the next morning and it's kind of in my head again. And then I sit down and get the next bit of it out. And it is because by the time you sit down to write, the book's already kind of formed in some way in your head. Now, having said that, I never know how books are going to end. And I don't. The one book, I think Little Girl Lost was the only book where I had a notion of how it was going to end and who the main villain was. And I was afraid in the writing of it that because I had known who it was, I had made it too obvious. So I changed the ending of it about 2 ways through. Because I thought, no, it's going to be so obvious who this is. So yeah, so part of the writing process is kind of a discovery as well. If I knew how it was going to end, I don't know if I would have quite the same impulse to write it.
I can understand that. We've got another hello from Leslie Lloyd. I just had a look on my phone because he's just coming up as Facebook user on mine, Leslie. So hello. Kaz wants to know, do you read crime whilst you write it? Now, I like asking this because I find it very difficult to work on something and then to be reading something that's a similar genre, but all I deal with is crime fiction. So there's no escaping it, and I'm not complaining about that.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm kind of the same as yourself with that. I find it quite difficult and would worry a little bit that the voice that I would be reading would begin bleeding into the voice that I'm writing. So to be honest, when I am writing, I tend not to read. Certainly, I don't read. I don't read crime fiction. I possibly don't even read fiction. I would probably read kind of a non-fiction book, simply because I want to focus on that story. And the danger is, of course, that when you're in the middle of writing it and you're reading something else, that you come across a plot point that's a glancing similarity to something that you have, and you then start to doubt everything. Like, that book's done it so much better than I could do it. So no, I tend actually not to read when I'm writing. And then I read for the other whatever months of the year, but not when I'm writing.
So I was talking to my husband earlier on today about Dora, who is the mother in the story. And just the detail that you've gone into with her, how much of that comes out in your first draft and how much is maybe edited in afterwards? She's a very... her character changes hugely throughout, or this inner strength comes out of her that she maybe has even forgotten's there. And she's just such a wonderful lead.
Yeah, thank you. Dora, actually, the edit, the kind of rewrite in the edit focused more on Eamon than on Dora, and toning him down a little bit, which if you've read it, you'll kind of understand what I mean by that.
Yeah.
But Dora, no, even in the first draft, I kind of knew from the start. I mean, the idea that I'd had for this book from the very beginning was focusing, kind of doing a character study on somebody whose child has gone missing, whose teenage daughter has gone missing, in the first 3 days, at 3 months, and then at 3 years after she has gone. And the idea of it was to kind of see how the character changed. And as she begins to investigate what has happened, she discovers things about herself and discovers things about her family that causes her to have to reassess everything that she thought that she knew, and that then changed her. And I suppose part of it was because with police procedurals, and I have 2 different series, one with Ben Devlin and one with Lucy Black. The police procedurals primarily about the detective. And you're kind of following the detective story, and especially the Devlin books, because they're a first-person narrative. It's very much about how the crimes impact on him and on his family and on that area. So I had kind of written quite a bit about the impact of a crime on the person investigating it. And then with The Last Crossing, this was a book about 3 people who have killed somebody. And they meet up 30 years later to go back to the woods where they buried him to see if they can remember where he was buried so that the body could be returned to the family. And it kind of alternates, it cuts between past and present, so it kind of alternates between the journey they're taking now and the journey that they took 30 years previous. And the reason that I wanted to do it was because I was really interested in kind of taking a break from the procedural idea and looking at the consequences of violence on the perpetrators of violence rather than the victims or the people investigating it. So I was really interested to see how would 3 people who had killed somebody, how would they have reconciled themselves to that 30 years later? Would they have reconciled themselves? Would they have told themselves that what they had done was right? Would they have justified it? Would they have felt that it blighted them? And then with this book, I wanted to look at the consequences of crime on the person left behind. And particularly because the first 3 days, but is quite busy. And even, the big Irish tradition of the wake, here is that kind of the first 3 days, everybody gathers round and everybody's supporting. And then after a couple of months, people move on and kind of go on with their lives. But for the person that's left behind, they haven't. Their wound is still raw. And then the 3 years idea was to kind of see how she might have reconciled herself to what she learns and what she does. And yeah, I can't say too much more about it at that stage because there's a few different things that I can't really mention.
It is very tricky. We were talking about this before we came online because there's characters that I'd like to discuss and we can't.
Yeah.
We just cannot mention everybody.
Yeah, there's quite. It's difficult actually to talk about it, and even in the past couple of events as well. We kind of, it's a difficult one to say too much about without kind of spoiling stuff. So yeah, I'm afraid.
Without being specific, there are characters that we can say we could quite happily flick them with frozen Brussels sprouts all day long and not feel bad about it.
Yeah, and I suppose what I was kind of interested in looking at as well was how, because it's, to my mind anyway, this book is a companion to The Last Crossing. So The Last Crossing was very much influenced by Greek tragedy, and because I think crime novels are the modern version of Greek tragedy. They're about justice, they're about order to disorder to new order, they're about that kind of sense of responsibility and consequences of actions, and so The Last Crossing was quite heavily influenced by that, and to my mind was kind of Tony's tragedy. And with this book, it's the kind of Pandora's jar story, which is where Dora obviously gets her name. And I suppose there were two things that interested me in it. One of them was the fact that in mythology, Dora is made to open the jar. Like literally, she is actually created so that will be her purpose. And yet she's blamed for unleashing all of this stuff onto the world, when in actual fact, she had no choice but to do it. And so likewise, Dora in this story does things that she really shouldn't do and unleashes kind of forces and events that she shouldn't. But she has no choice but to do it. And I kind of think anyone in the same situation would do the same thing. That's that kind of the ferocity of a mother's love for her child. And then the other thing that kind of interested me with the Pandora story was that there's two different versions of the ending. And in one version, she seals hope in the jar and won't let it out into the world. In the other version, she lets hope out, and that's what keeps us going despite all the horrible stuff. And so I was quite interested in playing with that a little bit as well. That kind of features later on in the book, that discussion about hope and redemption. So, yeah.
And it is interesting. You are willing Dora on, even though you think, what are you doing? What are you doing, you mad woman? Stop it. What are you doing? Why are you going there? Why are you talking to this person? Why are you doing that? But at the same time, you feel what she's feeling as you're reading. You are so, well, I found I was so attached to Dora.
Thank you.
I just wanted to be alongside her, supporting her. And it was, even though there is madness in it, you can really see why she's doing everything that she does and why she's poking bears and why all her actions seem realistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was it. Even in the writing of it, I was kind of going, right, what's she doing now? And with every stage of it, you're going, right, is that believable? Because ultimately that's what it is. And we've all, I mean, we're all readers primarily, and we've all read stories where at some stage somebody does something, you're going, yeah, that wouldn't happen. I wouldn't do that in that situation. And I was kind of lucky with this one. Normally when I'm writing, I kind of write the book and then my wife reads it after it's finished. With this one, because we were both kind of at home, because we both teach, so we were both kind of teaching from the kitchen simultaneously. And so whenever I would kind of get up at about 6:30 in the morning and write through to about 8. And then she would come down and read the chapter that I had written that day. So she was reading it as I was writing the book, which is a really odd process. I'd never done this before. And looking back, was fraught with all kinds of possible problems. But thankfully, none of them appeared. But that was really useful just to have a kind of an outside pair of eyes looking at it and going, yeah, I could see how that would happen. I can see why that she's doing that. And if at any point Tanya had said no, that's why you wouldn't do that, then that would have been enough for me to go, right, okay, I'm going to have to kind of reconsider where this is going. But yeah, it was very much in the writing of it. It was trying to make every step that she takes understandable and credible. So.
There was a scene, and it's quite early on. It's around chapter 7 or 8 off the top of my head, where Dora has realised that Ellie didn't come home. But that happens obviously straight away. And then it was when the police turn up and they come to talk to her and find out, you know, where she thinks Ellie's gone, why she thinks she's not come home. But before you know why they're there, it's that moment of the police pull up and this mum who is worried goes to the door and her daughter's missing. And I just found myself pausing for a minute to breathe, because just that feeling that I got just from reading it in the pit of my stomach, thinking, oh, what's he going to do to me here? What is this author going to do to my insides in this moment? And it's quite that the pause for breath and the gut punch before you even know what's coming just shows how well you set it up even before we got to that bit. You know, you're already on tenterhooks and your skin's already crawling and you're wondering what's going to happen.
Yeah, and thank you. And I'm glad. Well, I'm not glad that you felt that way, but I'm.
But you're glad that I felt that way.
But action, albeit it might not be the most pleasant one to feel. But yeah, I mean, again, it was very much about trying to be as realistic as possible, and not just using what happens as a kind of an inciting incident at the start of a story that then everybody just goes off and does heroic stuff, and it's almost forgotten. I mean, it's a breach in nature. It's that massive tear that and you need to kind of follow through on the consequences of that. So I'm sorry you felt that way, but I'm glad you felt that way as well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I was glad sitting back afterwards to write the review, and I was thinking, how do I word this? I actually sent it to you, didn't I, to say, how do I word this without giving anything away? Is this okay? Which is something I rarely do. I normally will write it and then it's out there and that's that. But I really didn't want to spoil anything, because it opens with so many questions and things are only revealed, maybe some of it much later on. So it's that delicate balance, because I hate it when reviewers spoil things. It makes me really not want to read what they write. And it makes me sad for the authors, because I think you work so hard on something. Nobody should be spoiling it for the reader before they pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose in some ways it's a book that kind of the less you know about it, possibly the better, because if you know too much, you might not want to read it, especially. But yeah, and I really appreciated the review, and appreciated the fact that you were trying to not give too much.
Not spoil it. Kaz reminded me, thank you, Kaz, that I hadn't put your name on screen. I think it was you earlier in the week when we were recording the promo, and I said, since COVID, I keep forgetting that I'm not pressing the thing, because mine's automatically set up. So your name is now on the screen. So thanks, Kaz. She's saying it's odd how many teachers are quite introverted. Now, I've never found this. I've worked with a lot of teachers. Makes me wonder what Chris McDonald thinks. Chris, are you introvert or not? Interesting. So let's say, and she was saying that teaching from home, she thought it was the worst thing. Now, I was at the time a teaching assistant. I've left that now and moved on, but I found, even as a teaching assistant, I worked one-to-one with young children, and I found that dreadful. I was not good at doing it with my own children. They're a bit older and they didn't want to listen to me.
That's the privilege of having children, is that they don't listen to a word that you say.
They do, just not when I'm teaching maths. High school maths made me cry. Not gonna lie.
First time, no, nothing worse than having to do it again. I think everybody was the same. I mean, I think particularly the second lockdown, the first one, there was just a sense everybody was doing their best and everybody was trying. But with the second one, there was more of an expectation that we were all experts on it. And I mean, obviously we weren't. I mean, everybody, even in the school that I was in, we were all taking different approaches, and some of us were recording lessons as we were doing them live, so that anybody that didn't join in then was able to join and afterwards. And some people were kind of posting notes through Google Classroom, and I think the difficult bit was trying to make sure that everybody was engaging. That was because you were aware of the fact that there were kids who maybe they were sharing one device between 3 or 4 children in the house, and only one of them could attend a class at any one time, and then you were trying to source laptops in the school to try to help people out, and yeah, it was tough going. And then I was kind of teaching from home in the morning, and then I was actually in school in the afternoon because kind of my responsibility within the school, and we were all working with key worker children, and so you were trying to support everyone as much as possible. But yeah, it was I think it was difficult for everybody that was involved. But then I think everybody that was trying to work through lockdown, it was a challenge for us all, trying to find new ways to do old things.
Yeah, it's all just come screaming back to me. Quite happy not to have to do that now. TG wants to ask if there are any of your characters that you would like to take out for a drink and a bite to eat.
Oh, that's a good question. In this book, I don't know. Dora, I would imagine.
I like Dora. There is somebody else, but it's a character that we meet. You know exactly who I mean. There is a character that we meet who I will not mention, but I would absolutely go for a drink with, or a cup of tea.
Yeah. In terms of all of my characters, Devlin, I think Devlin is he's a Garda detective with 2 kids, and he is probably as close to me as any of my characters. In terms of just his voice is very much my voice. It's a first person narrative, but his voice is quite close to mine, and I tend to use him as a bit of a psychiatrist and punch bag. So that when things are happening in my life, I use him as a way to work out how I feel about it. Because that's why I write. I write to work out how I feel about things, and to kind of get to take a step back from it and to be able to kind of consider it at a bit of a remove. And Devlin's really, really good for that. So, like the very first book that I wrote, my wife was pregnant with our first child, Ben. And I've told this story before, but when she was pregnant, there was that kind of nervous panic about what's going to happen and will everything be all right? And I really naively and stupidly thought, right, well, when the baby's born, everything's going to be grand. That'll be the worry will end. And in actual fact, as soon as he was born, the worry magnifies.
Oh yeah.
And you realize just how little control you have over the world when you now have responsibility for this life. And this person, and so the first Devlin book I think was because I also think writers are control freaks, and so the first Devlin book was a way of kind of taking control again of the world, the fictional world. I had absolutely no control. It's completely powerless in the real world, but in the fictional world you kind of decide what happens, and you are able to make sure that justice is done. In some form or other. And then I had kind of left, not that I had left Devlin behind, he had stopped talking to me, is the way that I tend to think of it after book 5. I went nearly 10 years without writing a Devlin. And then my dad passed away 3 years ago now, this May. And I knew that I wanted to write about that and kind of write about him as well. And so it was so obvious just to go back to Devlin. I mean, and again, it was one of those cases of his voice just appeared and went, right, let's do this story. So I think, in a very long-winded answer to the question, possibly Devlin, but it would be just like having dinner with myself. I like the character of Lucy as well, Lucy Black. She's a bit different, and she's very empathetic and possibly not as contemplative as Devlin. So yeah, I think either of those.
We've got a question. I'm not sure who it's from. It says, hello to both of you. Hello, I'm a new writer and I've taken the challenge to write a non-fiction crime story, and listening is helping me to stop doubting myself and push forward with the detail and try to remain human. That's good. Giving somebody inspiration during an interview must be a really nice feeling.
Yeah, and look, good luck. I mean, the only thing that I would ever give as advice, because everybody writes differently and everybody has a different process. And I mean, I know people who plan meticulously, and I know people who just kind of wing it. And I'm probably closer to the winging it than the planning. But the one thing that I would say to anybody who wants to write is to try to do it every day. I think you do need, particularly for a crime story, you get a sense of momentum. If you're writing every single day, it kind of drives the story forward. Whereas if you write for a week and then you take a break, when you come back to it, inevitably you'll read over what you wrote to try to remind yourself. And as soon as you read over it, you realize how far short it falls of your original intent. And so you then start redrafting it, and you spend another week and you haven't actually moved your story forward any. So look, fantastic, and good luck with it. I hope it goes really well for you, and hopefully we'll share shelf space at some stage. But write every day, I think, is the key when you're writing. Not 365 days a year, obviously, insane, but yeah, write every day when you're drafting it.
Steve Munoz over in California. Hi, Steve. Last Crossing was my favourite book last year. Beautiful writing.
Oh, bless you. Thank you.
Steve reads even more than I do, I think.
Yeah, Steve he's been very supportive, and I know he's been really, really supportive for the Last Crossing. So thank you very much, and I'm delighted you enjoyed it.
Oh, and actually, Kaz has followed that with that's high praise when you read a lot of books, and it is absolutely.
Thank you.
Somebody is fascinated by the fish tank, which shows how observant I am this week, because I hadn't actually spotted it, and now it's all I can see.
Yeah, it's been there for years, and the fish have been there for years as well, quite happily. So it's the sound of it. I find it quite relaxing whenever I'm writing. I kind of weirdly, I listen to music when I'm writing, but not with lyrics. Again, actually, partly because I think it would bleed into the sentence structure or kind of syntax within the story. So I tend to listen to instrumental or kind of instrumental pieces. But I also then in the editing, I don't listen to music when I'm editing because I need to kind of hear the story in my head. But there's something quite relaxing about the sound of a fish tank bubbling in the background.
Yeah, it's like rain noise. I live in Manchester, so rain noise is always a nice sound. It's a good job. I like it really because it's all it does at the moment.
Well, I was going to say I live in Northern Ireland, so that's just the soundtrack of our lives. That's
So somebody has said, I haven't read any of Brian's books yet, but need to. I'm letting the side down. Yes, you are. I don't know who that is, but yeah, absolutely.
That's okay.
But this is what it's for, because you go in to find new readers and you get lovely messages like you had from Steve, who already is a fan. So that's the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah,
you want to find new readers.
And I mean, one of the things about the group is we all love crime novels and books and reading and talking about books. So yeah, I'm quite happy to chat to everybody.
Somebody, who was it? Laura. Hi, Laura. We can be in the naughty corner together, being ex-Derry native myself.
Hi, how are you?
So yeah, need to remedy that straight away. Steve thinks Devlin would be a great person to spend some time with. So that's a double compliment, seeing as Ben Devlin is you.
Well, slightly, not entirely.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Laura's also asked, have you ever acted out a scene in your books to help with the writing process? So we have people who maybe read dialogue out loud just to check that it works. Or we have people who physically act out scenes to check that they work.
I haven't. No.
You look horrified at the thought of acting out a scene to check it works.
It depends on the scene. I mean, if it's kind of going for a coffee, that's fine. If it's killing somebody, that's possibly a bit more.
Yeah, we are not advocating actual murder. Let's just make that really clear. I don't want to get in trouble for that.
No, I'm kind of my instinct is to say no, but in actual fact, whenever I was doing the last crossing, because whenever we were kids, we had a great aunt lived in Paisley in Scotland, and every holiday, every half term, we would all head across in the car and take the ferry over and go up and stay in Paisley. And that was why that's the location for the last crossing. It was kind of a throwback to whenever I was a kid. But when I was writing it, I did the drive again, just to get a sense of not even to work out the plot, but to get a sense of the texture and the sounds and the smells and the sensations. And so yeah, my wife and our kids and I, we drove across and drove to the woods where the book concludes, and to walk up through them and recorded the sounds of them, which was really, really useful because I was standing there, and as I was recording it, kind of heard this building crescendo of a jet, and then realized that it was in the path of the airport. And so in the book, there's kind of a detail, and it's those we kind of the small things that create a sense of realism to it. So yeah, we did that, and I found a pub. If anyone has read The Last Crossing, there was a bar near the woods, and I went in and kind of took a look around and took a couple of sneaky photographs just to remind myself what it looked like. And then when the book came out, one of my neighbours called in and said, "You're not going to believe this, but our friends own that bar, and we're going to send them a copy of the book." So it turned out actually that my next door neighbours know the people that own the bar where Hugh Duggan goes for a drink before they head back into the woods. So it is a small world. But I was glad.
Small world. How bizarre.
But I was glad that I'd been there then, because I knew that the description of the bar was accurate to the reality of it. Whereas if I had just kind of driven past and then described what I thought it was like inside, and it wasn't actually what I was expecting when I went in, it might have been a different outcome.
Are all of the settings in your book somewhere that a reader can visit? So I drove years ago, and what's made me think of it is you talking about the smells of where you were driving. We drove through my poor husband. This was quite a few years ago now. My poor kids. We drove down to the setting in Wales of The Bones Beneath by Mark Billingham, Bardsey Island. And when we got there, hadn't checked the weather, hadn't occurred to me to do it, couldn't see the island for the fog, but the best smelling road I've ever been down was one in Wales where we drove over a hill and through somewhere near Bedgallert. I've got some, what's the word for this? Slates. Some Welsh slates from the village there, and the road up through the clouds was the trees. It was amazing, and that's what's just reminded me of it. So that's a long-winded way of saying, can people visit everywhere?
Certainly, yeah. In the Devlins and the Lucy books, I kind of play around a little bit with geography just because I can. So I've moved kind of buildings, particularly with the very first book, Borderlands. The Borderlands dance hall isn't actually in Lifford; it's about 30 miles away. But I kind of moved it up and thought nobody would mind. But yeah, the Lucy books are all fairly geographically accurate. The Last Crossing this one is probably the only one that's not explicitly set anywhere. All the other books are very clearly kind of they're set in Ireland or Northern Ireland, or with The Last Crossing, Ireland and Scotland. But this one is, I kind of deliberately wanted to make it a bit vaguer, so that the story is a bit more universal. and also just to kind of separate me a bit from the story as well, that it's not a place that I know, so that you're not kind of associating the place with the story. If that, I don't know if that makes sense, but it kind of made sense to me.
Yeah,
But it just,
I'd say that makes sense.
yeah, and it's also why it's Dora. It's why it's kind of a mother rather than a father. Again, there was a bit of a sense of just having a buffer between my own life experience and the story, and also just because, as I said earlier, because of that ferocity of mother's love, which is kind of breathtaking. But yeah, so again, a long-winded answer to the question. Yeah, you can move. And if I ever give up writing books, I'll organise tours. They'd be quite short, and I'd probably be the only person on them, and they'd involve pubs.
No, I'd come on that. I reckon you could fill that with book club members easily. The writing of it, being a mother of teenagers, I've got a younger one, a preteen as well, but it's unforgivably good. Before we came on, I said, I really don't want to talk to you right now. Because I've spent the day in that mindset of this fear and this worrying and this wondering and, you know, digging for information, and I can't get into it. I get really upset on camera.
I mean, I suppose part of it is, and I'm not going to preface this with as a parent, because I don't think you need to be a parent.
I don't think you need to be a parent to feel what you've written. I really don't.
But even in kind of general terms, I mean, you kind of see these appeals on TV, where you have people who are just devastated, and the kind of the debris of their lives is kind of paraded in front of people, and it's such a horrible, and it was trying to get a sense of this character being put through that, and that was kind of one of the key moments actually in the writing of it, was how the press conference, that so often is used as this is a supportive thing, or this is a way that the story will get leads and this will move things forward. And in Dora's case, actually, at the end of it, and it's not giving a massive amount away, but at the end of it, as she's walking out of the room, the detective says to her, "How was that?" And she says, "Humiliating." There was just, but again, I think our own sense of empathy as human beings, and I mean, especially if our readers reading encourages us to be empathetic anyway. So yeah, I mean, I hope that Dora's story is reflected with a bit of empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely lost where. Let me just scroll. We've got so many questions and comments. So Tony Millington, hi Tony. I've fallen into redrafting the story I'm writing at the moment and not moving it forward. That must be a tricky thing. Do you ever find that you get stuck on certain things and you need to find a way to move it forward? I don't know if I've frozen on your screen, but you are certainly frozen on mine at the moment. So, let me see. Can anybody tell me if I'm frozen or if it is Brian, which will only work if you can actually hear me. So let's see if we've got any messages from anybody. Brian's frozen. Thank you, Kaz. So I'm going to just dig out the review that I sent to Brian today, because I wanted to check that I wasn't going to give anything away. So, and he said it was absolutely fine. I've not given away anything that happens. But I went with how the book made me feel rather than going through any of the scenes or really talking about characters. Thanks, Laura. So I wrote beautifully written, poignant, perceptive, a story that will thrust you into unthinkable situations and drag you along, unable to look away, wringing the life out of you. You can actually still see my eyes are a bit red. I'm not getting any closer, but you can kind of tell the impact it's had on me reading this book today. There were moments when I found myself pausing to breathe before shuddering and bracing myself, because I just kept thinking, what is going to happen next? Where is this story going? And couldn't stop myself from being... I was so torn. I wanted to put it down for a bit, but I couldn't put it down for a bit. And it's one of those that just drags you on through it. And I was trying to shake off the growing dread. I thought it was moving and unforgettable. This book will take over and leave you with a feeling of not quite being the same person you were before you picked it up. And I found that such a difficult read, but such an easy read, which is obviously a conflict, but it is what it is. I've still not got Brian back at the moment, which is interesting. Let's see if he does actually come back. Just message him quickly. So I know Brian's been on, he's been to London this week. He was on with John Connolly earlier this week. I believe he's in Derry tomorrow. So it might be worth having a look at that just to see if there are any tickets left. He's just trying to come back. He's not sure what's happened. I can't see him at the moment, but we'll see. I am going to just quickly read you the blurb. Pandora, Dora Condren, wakes one morning to discover her 17-year-old daughter Ellie has not come home after a party. The day Ellie disappears, Dora is alone as her husband Eamon has already left for the day, and his job as a long-distance lorry driver. So Dora does the usual thing and rings around Ellie's friends, but no one knows where she is. Her panic growing, Dora tries the local hospitals and art college where Ellie is a student. But then the police arrive on her doorstep with the news that her daughter's handbag has been discovered dumped in a lay-by. So this is the scene that I was talking about earlier on, where the police turn up, and the growing dread of it as Dora goes to the door. And she's worried, obviously. She's wondering where her 17-year-old daughter is. And this was the scene that I stopped what I was doing. And I just had to take a second to brace myself, because I didn't know what was coming. And I feel like you get that a lot with this book. You are not really sure where it's going. You're not sure what's coming. You're not sure what the conclusion's going to be. And it does drain you reading it, but in a good way. It is a good way. So the last part of this. So begins Dora's ordeal of waiting and not knowing what has become of her girl. Eamon's lack of empathy and concern, Dora realises, is indicative of the state of their marriage, and left on her own, Dora begins to reassess everything she thought she knew about her family and her life. Increasingly isolated and disillusioned with the police investigation, Dora feels her grip on reality slipping as she takes it upon herself to find her daughter, even if it means tearing apart everything and everybody she has ever loved and taking justice into her own hands. Hello.
Sorry, no idea what.
Okay.
I suspect
I had a lot to say, so it was absolutely fine.
I have no idea what you said. I'm going to assume that it was all positive. But and if it wasn't,
it was.
Pretend that I'm not aware. Sorry, I actually think the kids possibly are watching Netflix or on the Xbox or something. So.
Or maybe it's this fun weather we're having. I mean, we've had snow, hail, and sun in the space of 20 minutes at one point in the last couple of days. So
no apologies to everyone. And thank you for waiting for me.
That's okay. I'm hoping my waffling made sense to everybody, but I was reading the blurb and talking about the scenes that we'd mentioned, and just going back over a little bits that we've talked about. Tony Millington has asked, which of your series would a new reader need to start with?
Well, either or. The first book in the Devlin series is Borderlands, and that
was your debut.
Yeah, and it's set in kind of Lifford. It's just set on the border. And then the first book in the Lucy Black series is Little Girl Lost. So either of those, and then the Last Crossing and this one, The Empty Room, are two standalones. So, but from the series, Little Girl Lost for the Lucy books, which is set in the north, or else Borderlands for the Devlin series, which is set in Donegal.
And Steve has said the same, was saying to Tony that the Devlin series is excellent, starts with Borderlands. Somebody has said, sounds like a great book. I'm assuming that's from my waffling, and it is. If you can't tell, the second I start chatting and not even thinking, you can just tell where my head's been with it all day.
Thank you.
And Steve said he's anxiously waiting for The Empty Room to arrive from No Alibis. I've not heard of No Alibis. I'm assuming that is a bookshop.
It is, yeah. No Alibis is a bookshop in Belfast. I'm wondering if I've frozen again.
On mine, you seem fine.
Right, perfect. No, you have frozen on mine, but then that happened the last time. It was actually me, I think, that had frozen. No Alibis is a bookshop in Belfast, and in fact, it was kind of where I started reading crime. I did my degree at Queen's in Belfast, and just after I finished my degree, this crime shop had opened, and I wandered in and bought a Morse omnibus and a copy of Ian Rankin's Black and Blue, and then arrived back in the next day, and that started me on about 10 years of reading crime constantly before I started writing the Devlin books.
So do you think that's what got you into writing crime?
Yeah, I think it's possibly what got me into writing crime. I mean, I had always been writing in the way that kind of, I suppose, anyone who's interested in writing, you kind of writing stories whenever you were and then writing kind of longer form stuff as a teenager, and then poetry and doggerel and plays and stuff. But yeah, and what happened partly with Borderlands. I mean, I kind of said already about the about Ben being born, but there was quite a lot. I love crime series. So I like the James Lee Burke series, Robo Show, amazing. Ian Rankin's amazing. And John Connolly and Michael Connolly, like those, it was a lot of those kind of series characters that I was reading at that stage, and I had reached a point where quite a few of them were either dying or retiring, or there was a sense, particularly I remember I was reading in James Lee Burke's, I think it's Last Guardian Elysian Fields, and towards the end of it, Robo shows out jogging in the park at dawn, and he takes a pain on his chest. And he thinks he's taking a heart attack. He thinks he's going to die. And there's this moment where he goes, "Is this it? After everything, is this how it ends?" And I remember being really sad at the fact that all of these series that I loved and all of these characters that I loved and loved spending time with every year, because that's the lovely thing with a series. You kind of catch with an old friend every year. And I remember being really quite saddened at the thought that these were all ending, and kind of was going, who am I going to read? What friend am I going to revisit? So I wrote Borderlands almost as a character in whose company I would be quite happy to spend time for a number of hours each year. And it wasn't, I didn't write it with any intention to publish it or to try to get it published. I wrote it as I suppose quite a selfish exercise, as a book that I would want to read as a crime reader. And then when I wrote it, I kind of felt that I wanted to hear more and to know more about him. So I started the second, and I had said to a friend of mine that I had written this first one, and he read it and encouraged me to send it to publishers. But it took a while to find a publisher, and by the time I found a publisher, I already had the second written, which was great because it meant I didn't have the difficult second album syndrome. It was a difficult third album instead.
But I suppose that gave you a bit of time to play with as well, though. Less of a panic to get the second one written because you were already there.
Yeah, it did. And particularly then when I was kind of doing a book a year. And as the kids got a bit older, I kind of struggled a little bit with the book a year. The past 3 years, I have managed to get a book a year, partly because lockdown provided a little bit of headspace to be able to write, but I do find it's getting a wee bit more challenging to be able to do a book a year and have it at a standard where you kind of feel you can stand over it and be kind of proud that it's as good as you can make it. Because I mean, the thing is, like, I mean, crime readers are fantastic in that. And crime authors kind of understand this, and generally we all get on with one another because we're not competing. Like crime readers will read 50, 60, 100 books a year. So it's kind of a rising tide that floats all boats. But you're also aware of the fact that it's a real privilege. The fact that somebody not only is prepared to spend money, but more importantly to me, is prepared to allow your voice to be kind of in their head and kind of conjuring their imagination for the 8 or 9 hours that it takes to read a book. I mean, that's such a privilege, and you want to be sure that you're not abusing that by kind of writing anything that you feel you can't stand over, or that you feel you haven't put everything you possibly can into. So yeah, that has been. I'm finding that, I think, a little bit more difficult, that trying to meet the book a year almost expectation with crime novels, but also trying to make sure that each book feels different and fresh, and is kind of bringing something slightly different to the table each time, and is as good as I can make it.
Kaz has just sent me a message asking me what the book behind me with the red spine is. It's The Guilty Couple. It's an ARC, an advanced reader copy of a C.L. Taylor book that's out this, I believe it's out in June off the top of my head. So there you go, Kaz. That's what it is. And she's saying, okay, I'd have skipped this if I'd have realised. This has been a fab interview. I want to skip that bit. Sam, I'm in awe of how you cope when an author freezes, so much better than me. And Brian has been fascinating. Thanks. And you have been fascinating. And Steve's saying to Kaz that we're both real pros. And we're both saying, thank you, Steve. That's really nice. It's really easy to waffle on when you've just finished such a fantastic book.
Thank you. And I'm sorry. Sorry for ducking out halfway through it. But I was desperately trying to get logged back in again, while texting the family to go, would you come off any?
Put your devices down, switch them off.
Step away from the TV.
Thank you so much. I've absolutely loved getting to know you a bit more this week, and I've got more books to read, which I'm really excited about. And The Empty Room has been a fantastic read. I've not done anything else today. I looked up when I finished the book at tea time and realised I'd been in my pyjamas all day. I'd just not moved. Just not moved from this one spot on the couch, and had people bringing me cups of tea, which was rather lovely.
Well, it's
been quite a nice day.
Everybody needs a day like that, at least one. I think it should be a requirement that we all get a day to just sit in our pajamas and read books and have people feed us tea.
Can I have that in writing to give to my kids?
Look, thank you so much, and thank you to everybody that has joined us. I mean, I know on a Friday evening everybody has loads of stuff to do, so I really appreciate you taking not just the time to read the books, but also to support it. So thank you, Sam. Really, very grateful.
Give us a quick reminder. I'll hold it up again. Have you noticed, you might not have noticed this, but Tony Millington will tell you, I now put books here because if I put them anywhere else, I knock everything onto my own head. So give us a quick recap of The Empty Room.
So The Empty Room is... The Empty Room is the story of Dora Condren, who wakes one morning to discover that her 17-year-old daughter hasn't come home. And it visits her at those 3 key moments in the first 3 days after Ellie goes, and then 3 months and 3 years, as she begins to investigate herself and kind of learns things about Ellie and about her family and about herself that she begins to maybe regret finding out.
Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you, all the members, for your questions and comments and tuning in. And I look forward to it next time Kaz gets you, but I get you the time after that, so it's fine. Well, thank you so much. Good luck with your event tomorrow. In fact, do you want to let everybody know what you're doing tomorrow?
Yeah, no, it's just a signing in Waterstones in Derry. In the Foyle side, there's a new Waterstones has opened, which is lovely. So it's a kind of a home signing tomorrow afternoon at 2:00. So yeah, as I say, look,
so anyone in the area, go down, buy a copy, and get it signed.
Yeah, come and say hello. Even if you don't buy a copy, just come and say hello. We'll talk about crime books. So.
You're so nice. They need to buy it, and they will forgive you by the time they finish reading it for putting them through the ringer, because it's just so bloody good.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you for a lovely Friday evening.
Thanks. All the best. Take care.